There was only one plate on the table, a shallow plastic dish cracked along one side, the kind that holds heat just long enough to make the hunger worse before it cools into silence. The boy was 5, maybe 6, his legs swinging beneath the bus chair, unaware of the way his mother watched him, not as a woman watches a child, but as someone watches a reason to keep breathing. He ate slowly, the way children do when they're used to rationing. 2 spoons of rice, a strip of egg, a few soft beans. He never asked where her plate was, not because he didn't care, but because he had grown used to the pattern. She would serve him, smile, kiss the top of his head, then say, "I already ate, baby." It was always said with such lightness, such certainty, that he believed her. That was her gift. She could starve quietly, gracefully, without leaving a trace of absence. After dinner, she gathered the dish, still warm from his little hands, and walked to the sink. Her steps were slower now. Her knees ached in a way they hadn't the weeks before. Her lower back pulsed with tension, and her stomach, empty since Monday, had begun to twist in ways she couldn't control. But she wouldn't let it show. With her sleeves rolled up, she let the water run across her fingers, the sound soft and familiar. The steam warmed her skin, made her forget for a moment how cold her limbs had become. She washed that single dish, as if it were 100, as if each scrub of the sponge kept the truth away just a little longer. The truth that there was no dinner for her, that there hadn't been. Not once this week, not even a crust of bread. Everything had gone to him. Every crumb, every drop of oil. She told herself it was fine. That adults could last longer. That her body had strength stored from better days. That this wasn't forever, just a bad stretch. She lied with grace, because that's what mothers do. They lie to themselves so their children don't have to. Outside, the night hummed with distant traffic, and the sound of neighbors' televisions echoing through thin walls. Life went on for others. In other kitchens, other mothers laughed over full sinks, their children bathed and well-fed, warm in pajamas. She didn't envy them. Not exactly. What she felt was harder to name, a dull ache, a sense of being misplaced in her own life, like everyone else had moved forward, and she'd been left standing at the edge of something too wide. To cross. The boy called to her from the mattress in the living room. He asked for water, and she brought it to him, crouching slowly so her knees wouldn't give way. He drank, then curled under the blanket that barely covered his feet and whispered, "Good night, Mom." She stroked his hair until his breathing slowed, until she was sure he'd drifted off into the kind of sleep only children get to have, deep, untroubled, safe. Then she stayed there, sitting on the floor beside him, her back to the peeling wall, her hands in her lap. The hunger had dulled into something quieter now, not gone, but patient. A low hum beneath her ribs, a reminder of the deal she'd made. He would eat, she would wait. That was the rhythm of the week. One meal, one child, one lie at a time. She didn't cry. She hadn't for days. Crying used energy, and right now, all energy was survival. Every decision, every movement had to be measured. She could no longer stand too quickly without seeing black. She'd learned to sit slowly, to hold onto door frames, to take deep breaths before lifting anything heavier than the kettle. But she'd kept moving. That was the rule. Keep moving, even if the body wants to stop. Because a mother who stops, even just to rest, risks collapsing entirely. And who would be there then? Who would take over? There was no one, not a sister, not a friend, not even the boy's father, whose number she no longer remembered, whose voice she couldn't recall if she tried. The fridge hummed in the corner, nearly empty. Inside, a half bottle of tap water, a single carrot softening on the shelf, and a packet of soup base she was saving for emergencies, though she no longer knew what qualified as an emergency. She hadn't opened it because if she gave it to him now, what would she have tomorrow? What if things got worse? What if he got sick? Hunger teaches strategy, teaches fear. It strips you of dignity, but sharpens something else. She had become an expert at pretending, at stretching days, at calculating the exact time of day he'd be hungriest, and making sure that was the moment she remembered dinner, at rubbing her stomach in front of him and saying, "So full, I couldn't eat another bite," when the truth was she hadn't eaten a single one. That night, she lay on the floor beside the mattress, a thin sheet pulled over her body, curled, away from the window to avoid the draft. She pressed her hands to her belly to quiet the noise it made. She thought of the morning, how she'd go to the market and stand outside, hoping to be asked to carry groceries or sweep a stall. Maybe someone would offer her leftovers, maybe not. But she'd go anyway. She had to. Not for herself, for him. Always for him. She closed her eyes and listened to his breathing, steady and deep. She held on to that sound like a lifeline. Because as long as he slept, as long as he ate, as long as he smiled, then maybe this sacrifice didn't feel like dying. Not yet. Not entirely. The next morning began the same way all the others had that week. With silence, no alarm, no buzzing phone, no scent of coffee or sound of breakfast. Just the soft rhythm of the boy's breathing beside her and the stiffness in her limbs, heavier now than the day before. She rose slowly, careful not to wake him, and sat for a moment at the edge of the mattress, waiting for her head to stop spinning. The floor felt colder than usual, or maybe she was just colder. The hunger had settled into her bones by now. It no longer shouted, no longer clawed at her insides. Instead, it sat still and patient, like it knew it had won. She dressed him first, lifting his arms into a second-hand jacket 2 sizes too big. He smiled when she adjusted the sleeves, pretending it was a superhero cape. She smiled back, because that was part of the routine. Pretend, protect, perform. She wrapped a scarf around his neck and told him they were going to look for work. Maybe someone would need help, and maybe she could earn enough for a little something to eat. He asked if there would be lunch. She kissed his cheek and said, "Let's see what we find." That was her version of hope now, a vague possibility, a softened maybe. They walked together through cracked sidewalks and narrow alleyways where the buildings leaned in like tired old men. She carried a bag with nothing inside, just to make herself look like someone on her way somewhere. In front of the corner store, she waited as people passed. Some glanced at her, most didn't. She watched as one woman loaded bags into her car and debated offering help, but something in the woman's expression warned her not to. She moved on, reaching the open market by mid-morning. The smell of bread and grilled meat made her stomach twist. She pushed it down. There was no space for that now. She approached 3 different stalls, offering to clean, sweep, carry crates, anything. The first vendor waved her off before she finished the sentence. The second told her he already had someone. The third didn't answer at all, just turned his back and kept counting change. She thanked them anyway, always thank them, always smile. A mother who begs can't afford to seem bitter. Bitterness pushes people away. Gratitude might pull someone closer, even just for a second, but not today. Today, no one stepped closer. Near the public clinic, she sat on a bench to rest. Her legs shook beneath her. She had eaten nothing in 6 days now, not fully. A taste of broth from her son's spoon. 2 nights ago when he wasn't looking. Chewed crust of bread she'd found in the bottom of an old bag. Nothing more. Her eyes stung from the wind, or maybe the exhaustion. She wasn't sure anymore. She watched people come and go from the building, some limping, some coughing, some laughing loudly on their phones. She considered going in and saying she felt faint. But what would she say when they asked why? She wasn't sick, just starving. And starving isn't a medical emergency when there are no bruises, no visible wounds, just silence in the blood. Still, she walked in. The boy sat beside her in the waiting area, coloring on a scrap of receipt paper with a broken pencil. She waited 40 minutes before the nurse called her forward. Inside the small room, the woman asked routine questions. Did she have a fever? Vomiting? Pain? She said no to all of it. She didn't know why. Maybe pride, maybe shame, maybe the understanding that people only help when you fit a category. And she didn't. She was just tired, dizzy, a little cold. The nurse looked her over with a glance that didn't reach her eyes. You should eat better, she said flatly. Try to rest, maybe vitamins. Then handed her a folded paper and sent her out. No one asked her name. No one asked if she had a home, a job, a family, and she didn't offer any of it. She walked out with the boy and held his hand tightly, not because she was afraid of losing him, but because she felt like she was losing herself. Her body was beginning to fail in small ways, a flutter in her chest, a numbness in her hands. She hadn't had her period in 2 months. Her hair was thinning. Her knees burned when she knelt to tie his shoe. But none of it mattered. He was still fed. That was the only score she kept. Back at the apartment, she looked through the cupboards again, as if something might have appeared while they were gone. It hadn't. She knew that. But she checked anyway, hands moving over empty shelves, fingers pausing on the edge of a dusty jar. Nothing. In the fridge, the carrot had wilted to mush. The water tasted of metal. Still, she poured a glass for the boy and told him dinner would be ready soon. He didn't ask what. He never did. That was the unspoken agreement now. Don't ask, don't cry, just trust. She told him to lie down and rest, then sat on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the blank wall. It was quieter in the afternoon. The neighbors were out. The television above had stopped humming. Even the outside noise had faded. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine something else, a job with hours and pay, and maybe even a uniform, a stove that worked, a pot full of soup that could last 3 days, a child who didn't have to count spoonfuls, a life where asking for help didn't feel like failing. But then the boy called her name, and the thought disappeared. She got up. Too fast? The room shifted. She grabbed the side of the wall and closed her eyes until the spinning stopped. When it did, she went to him, brushed his hair back from his face, and whispered that everything was okay, that tomorrow would be better, that mothers are strong. And he believed her, because he had to, because she needed him to, because if he didn't, then all of it, the hunger, the silence, the slow unraveling, would mean nothing, and she couldn't let it mean nothing. By the 7th day, her body had stopped whispering and started screaming, not in words or cries, but in a quiet rebellion that touched every movement. She could no longer trust her legs when she stood. They trembled beneath her like branches in heavy wind. Her hands were stiff, sometimes unable to close fully around simple things like the faucet or a piece of cloth. Her lips cracked in the corners, and her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth even after drinking water. But still, she moved. Still, she rose with the sun and smiled for her child. Still, she held on to the rhythm of pretending, because the second she stopped, the whole world might notice just how close she was to falling apart. She had stopped going out by then. The dizziness made walking dangerous, especially with him by her side. The market was too far, the waiting room at the clinic too full, the neighbors too busy to look twice. So she stayed inside. She tore an old towel into pieces and cleaned the apartment slowly, inch by inch, using the motion to stay awake, to keep her limbs from locking in place. At one point, she knelt to scrub a corner of the kitchen floor and nearly passed out from the effort. She gripped the edge of the stove and waited for her vision to come back. The black spots faded, but the warning didn't. Her body was sending her messages now, whether she wanted them or not. The boy noticed. That morning, he'd watched her longer than usual as she folded a pillow with shaking hands. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked gently. Her smile was too late, too forced, but she nodded. "Just tired, baby, that's all." He came to her side and pressed his head against her hip. It was the only part of her that didn't flinch. The rest of her ached, under the weight of his touch, not because he was heavy, but because even love felt like pressure now. She kissed the top of his head and held him for a few seconds longer than usual. She wanted to stay there, holding on, but she knew she had things to do, always things to do. She boiled water, even though there was nothing to put in it. The act of cooking mattered, even if the food didn't exist. It kept the illusion alive. He needed to see steam, to hear the clink of the spoon against the pot, to believe there was something coming. She faked the meal with skill. A little water over rice flakes, mashed into a paste, shaped into a ball and flattened like a patty. She told him it was a new recipe. He believed her, and that belief was her last form of nourishment. Watching him eat, chewing carefully, thanking her with his eyes, made her feel human for a moment, useful. But that moment was short. When he finished, she told him to lie down and rest. Then she crawled to the bathroom and sat on the cold floor, her back against the tub. She didn't know how long she sat there, minutes, maybe hours. She stared at the drain as if waiting for something to rise up from it and carry her away. Her stomach was so hollow that it felt foreign, like it no longer belonged to her. Her joints pulsed with heat and cold at the same time. Her heart fluttered like a dying bird. She touched her neck and felt the skin loose, papery. Her body was disappearing from the inside out. She tried to stand and nearly fell. The room spun sideways and she braced herself against the toilet. She vomited, but there was nothing to come up. Only bile, only air, only the sound of suffering without substance. Afterward, she rinsed her mouth with water and wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. Her eyes looked sunken, her cheeks sharp. She hadn't seen herself properly in days. Maybe that was on purpose. It was easier not to look. That afternoon, the boy brought her a blanket. "You're cold," he said, draping it over her shoulders like he'd seen her do for him so many times before. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't just cold, that her body was failing, that she hadn't eaten in a week, and that things were getting worse faster than she expected. But she couldn't say any of it. She couldn't transfer that weight to him. Instead, she pulled him close and whispered, "I'm okay. You're such a good boy." He smiled, proud, and leaned against her. She hadn't told anyone, not because she didn't want help, but because help had stopped being an option long ago. The phone she once used to text potential clients hadn't worked in weeks. Her list of contacts was empty. Family? None that spoke to her. Friends? They had their own problems, and besides, how do you ask someone for food when you haven't spoken in years? The shame was louder than the hunger, and that was saying something. So she did what she'd always done. She kept going. Even as the world blurred at the edges and her hands forgot how to stay steady. That night, she didn't hear the neighbors. She didn't hear the television upstairs or the dog barking across the courtyard. Everything had gone quiet inside and out. She lay beside the boy and watched him sleep, his mouth slightly open, his breath soft and even. She touched his face gently, tracing the roundness of his cheek, the flutter of his lashes. He had no idea how close she was to breaking, and he shouldn't. That was her promise. She'd fall apart, yes, but never in front of him, never where he could see it, never where it could touch him. She stayed awake long after he drifted off, listening to the thud of her heart, the slow hum of her blood thinning. She counted the seconds between each breath. She whispered things to herself just to feel her voice. She thought about how long a person could survive like this, not just without food, but without being seen, without being held, without being asked, "Are you really okay?" Not once had anyone asked and waited for an honest answer, and now it felt too late. She fell asleep sitting up, the boy's blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, the pot on the stove still half full of boiled water. Her body sagged into the wall behind her, still, silent, waiting. Morning arrived, not with sunlight, but with stillness. A heavy kind of quiet that filled the apartment like fog. The boy stirred first, rubbing his eyes, glancing over to where his mother had fallen asleep sitting upright beside him. Her head was tilted forward, her chin resting on her chest, her breathing shallow but steady. He called to her softly, unsure whether to wake her or not. She didn't respond, but her hand twitched slightly, so he let her sleep. He went to the bathroom on his own, then returned to the mattress and pulled the thin blanket over them both. He didn't know the word for it, but he could feel something was wrong. Something had shifted. She woke 2 hours later and couldn't move her legs, not completely. There was still sensation, but the act of standing had become foreign. Her muscles refused, her spine screamed, her vision doubled the moment she lifted her head, and she had to lie back down, panting, clutching her side. The boy watched her from the corner, eyes wide but quiet. He didn't ask questions this time. He just brought her the empty cup and said, "Here, you forgot to drink water." She thanked him, her voice barely audible, and drank slowly, trying to force the dizziness away. But it didn't leave, it only deepened. She managed to crawl toward the kitchen. Her movements were uneven, desperate, like someone trapped in a dream where everything moves slower than it should. She reached the sink and gripped the edge to pull herself up. The pain that shot through her legs was immediate and brutal, but she kept going, because there were still dishes in the sink, because the illusion of normalcy mattered more than the agony. If she could just wash them, just clean the space, maybe she'd feel a little better. Maybe she'd buy herself another day of pretending. She turned the water on. The sound of it running was the only sound in the apartment. The boy had gone quiet again, sitting on the mattress, watching cartoons on mute. He didn't know how to fix what was happening. He only knew to stay small, stay calm, do what she'd taught him, wait until she called for him. But she didn't call. She held onto the sink with both hands, her knuckles white, her breath shallow, her lips trembling, and then her knees gave out. There was no scream, no crash, just the soft final sound of a body sliding down against porcelain and tile. Her shoulder hit the cabinet on the way down, but she didn't register the pain. The world had already gone dim, her vision tunneled, her ears filled with static. She tried to call his name, but her lips wouldn't move fast enough. She landed sideways, her face pressed against the cold floor, one arm curled beneath her. The water ran above her head, steady and indifferent. The last thing she remembered was the drip, drip, drip of the faucet and the sound of her own heartbeat slowing into silence. The boy didn't see it happen. When he came into the kitchen 10 minutes later, he saw her legs first, then the outline of her body curled on the floor. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure if she was playing some kind of game, unsure if he should speak. Then he ran to her side and shook her shoulder gently. "Mom," he whispered. Nothing. He tried again, louder this time. "Mom, wake up." Still nothing. He felt the panic rise in his throat, the same way it did when the power would go out, at night, or when a thunderstorm shook the windows. But this was worse, because she wasn't blinking, she wasn't moving. He ran to the hallway and knocked on the neighbor's door with both fists. A man answered, confused and half-dressed, and the boy pointed back toward the apartment, saying, "My mom won't get up, she's on the floor." The man followed him. Quickly now, urgency growing with each step. When he saw her lying there, he called for help. Another neighbor came, then another. Someone used a phone. Someone checked her pulse. The boy stood by the doorway, small and silent, his hands shaking. He didn't know what to do. No one told him what was happening. The ambulance came 10 minutes later. The paramedics lifted her gently onto a stretcher. Her skin was cold, but her heart still beat. Barely. They asked if she had any medical conditions. No one knew. They asked for her name. No one answered. She had no ID, no records, no one to call. Just a little boy clinging to the edge of the hallway, watching everything with wide eyes, gripping a blanket in his hand. At the hospital, The nurse filled out a chart marked unknown. They hooked her to fluids, drew blood, ran tests. The diagnosis was simple but brutal: extreme malnutrition, severe dehydration, dangerously low blood pressure. It wasn't new. It had been building for days, maybe weeks. She had been walking on the edge of collapse for longer than anyone realized. And now, her body had done the only thing it could: shut down. No one came to visit. No emergency contacts were listed. No family name was recognized. She lay in the hospital bed, silent and still, her son curled in a chair beside her. He didn't cry. Not yet. He just sat there, waiting for her to wake up, waiting for someone to explain why a mother would fall like that, why no one had stopped it, why it had to get that far before anyone noticed. And all around them, life went on. Machines beeped. Nurses walked past. Phones rang. Outside, the city moved like it always did, fast, loud, indifferent. But in that small room, a mother lay still. A boy sat beside her. And the silence between them said everything that no one else had bothered to ask. She woke to a brightness that hurt her eyes. The ceiling above her was pale and unfamiliar, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air like something living. For a moment she thought she had died, not because the pain was gone, but because it had changed. It was duller now, further away, like it had been wrapped in cotton. Her limbs were heavy, but no longer screaming. Her mouth was dry, her throat raw. And then she turned her head and saw him. He was asleep in a chair beside her bed, curled up, with his head resting against the plastic armrest, the same blanket from home wrapped around his shoulders. Her eyes filled with tears before she knew why. Not from pain, not even from relief, but from the way he looked so small in that chair, as if the entire world had asked too much of him all at once. Her hand moved slowly toward him, brushing the edge of his foot. He stirred, looked up, and when he saw her eyes open, his whole body jolted upright. "You're awake," he whispered, like he wasn't sure it was real. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, so she just nodded. He smiled, that same quiet smile he always gave her when things were still broken, but he believed they might not stay that way forever. She reached for his hand and held it tightly, needing to feel that he was really there, needing to feel that she still had something left to hold. Later, the doctor came. He asked her name, her age, her history. She answered what she could. When he asked if she had any family, she paused for a long time before saying, "Just him." He wrote things on a chart, mentioned blood transfusions, anemia, rest. When he left, the room felt colder than before. Not because of anything he said, but because she realized, truly realized, how close she had come to not waking up at all. No one else came. No friend, no neighbor, no voice on the phone asking if she was okay. Days passed like that, quiet, slow, empty. Nurses changed shifts. The boy colored on leftover forms and played quietly near her bedside. He didn't ask many questions. He just stayed. The staff brought extra meals for him when they remembered. When they didn't, she gave him parts of hers. She wasn't supposed to, but some habits don't die, even in recovery. He had always eaten first. That was the rule. Even in a hospital bed hooked to IVs and monitors, she found ways to keep it. One afternoon, when the fluorescent lights flickered against the late-day sun, a nurse came in. Not the usual one. Younger, quieter, with tired eyes and soft hands. She checked the monitors, took notes, adjusted the drip. Before leaving, she paused, then reached into her own bag and pulled out a lunchbox, carefully wrapped in a cloth. "I know I'm not supposed to," she said, glancing toward the hallway, "but I brought this for you. You shouldn't have to give him your food, not anymore." She placed it gently on the bedside table. A simple thing: rice, chicken, a small bottle of juice. Nothing extraordinary, but it felt sacred. The boy's eyes widened. The mother stared at it without speaking. The nurse hesitated at the door and then said more quietly, "You're not the only one. I grew up watching my mom do the same, pretending she wasn't hungry so I wouldn't feel guilty for eating. I didn't understand it until I was older. Now I do. She didn't wait for thanks, just nodded and stepped out, leaving the door slightly open. The mother looked at the food for a long time, then looked at her son. She wanted to cry but didn't, not now. Instead, she opened the container slowly, lifted the lid, and handed him the first bite. He looked at her, confused. "But aren't you hungry?" he asked. She smiled, tired but real this time. "We'll eat together," she said. And they did. For the first time in days, she let the food touch her mouth without guilt, without calculation, without pretending. The rice was warm and the juice was sweet, and with each bite, she felt something return, not just strength, something deeper, the knowledge that even in a world where no one knew her name, someone had seen her, had chosen to care. When night came and the hospital lights dimmed, she lay with her hand over her son's chest, feeling it rise and fall beneath the blanket. He slept peacefully, his face soft and calm, and she knew it wasn't over, that when they left this place, the struggle would return, that the hunger might knock again, that no miracle was waiting just outside the door. But for now, she had another day. She had breath. She had him. And she had been reminded by a stranger with tired eyes and a hidden lunchbox that even in the quietest kind of suffering, someone might still notice. Someone might still reach out, gently, and say, "I understand," and that was enough.